Hey, good morning. Morning, everybody. Happy April 8th, I think is what today is. Yesterday was my birthday, so that's why it's a memorable date for me. And other late breaking news, I finally figured out why my live streams were cutting out. So if you've been hanging out with me for a while on these Thursday, there's always these spots where I would lose connectivity. And I finally figured it out. It's my house. Like when I'm within, what's funny is I could barely see my house, which tells me my wireless in my house is is pretty powerful. But as I would near my, an area near my house, it would flip over to Wi-Fi and then flip back. And of course, as you know, that's not the greatest for live streaming. So hello from Chicago. Hello Pakistan. I know. Hello, Ireland. I love how international these sessions are. So, some of you saw the big announcement, which is probably the beginning of many an announcement over the last few days, where Kits, the name of this channel, has been changed to Viato, and I'll talk more about that as time goes on. But if you haven't seen that announcement, you might check that out. Gives you kind of a sneak peek of where we're going. The exotic city of Atlanta. I love it. So I want to dive in to our topic this morning, which, man, what a tough one. How to rock your remote meetings. Like it or not, COVID has changed the world in terms of how we do meetings, how we communicate with each other. Working remotely is now a norm for a lot of people. Not everybody, and I would say even now, as it appears that COVID is fading. And again, this is dependent on culture, it depends on the area, but it appears to be that COVID is fading, or at least the urgency around it is fading, where I see a lot more businesses kind of regrouping and people coming back in. But I think a lot of people are like, okay, I'm now working remotely as part of my job, or my manager is, or whatever the case is. So we find ourselves in this place where we have remote meetings that are happening. Man, I'm watching some of the comments coming in. I should do a live session. Maybe that'll be my next one, just on Viato. What that is, what prompted that. Some people asking, are you still with CBT? All of those questions I would love to talk through. So I'm going to put those in a parking lot. Let me get back to the topic at hand. Remote meetings. I know there's no one-size-fits-all answer, because as soon as you talk about meetings in general, there's so much cultural and whatnot. So I would love for you to chat in and guide a lot of what we talk about as we're walking and talking this morning, because I know that I can't give you a blanket statement, but what I can give you is some pointers that we've picked up at VIA, and I've seen work over time as we've jumped into remote meetings. So hello, Russia. So first off, one of the values that we have at VIA, and when I say VIA, I'm talking about the managed service provider that I run, that pretty much has about 30 people scattered around various parts of the United States, mostly in Arizona. But we've done a lot of experimenting with these remote meetings. So first off, we have a culture of connecting with people. It's a big part of our relationship-driven way that we do things. So one of the things that we did with remote meetings is we said, if it's not prohibitive, meaning, and I'll give you some examples of this, always have your video on. So just about everybody on their devices either has a webcam or a little streaming camera of some sort. Always keep your videos on in the meetings. And the reason we did that is not only for the connection, but there's just something, when your video's on, you're way less likely to just walk out. You're way less likely to get engaged in a lot of the distractions all around you and things like that. So video on, mic on was one of the principles that we instituted. Not a hard, fast rule, like, this is on your performance review, but it's more of just like, hey, this is what we expect, in meetings. But we've also had people, as they've been driving, they have their camera on in the car as they're part of a meeting. I'm like, okay, I don't want you to crash or anything like that. So obviously, that's why I say with some exception. So that's one of the first things that we did, because remote meetings, as you know, it's hard to stay engaged. It's hard to, I love it. Thank you, Filthy Animal. He said, I hate speaking to someone who I just see as initials on the screen. Yeah. Especially if you have your video on and you're trying to have a communication and you just see the initials kind of lighting up as they're talking. There's just, there's a huge, it's like, well, while we're talking COVID, there's a lot of times I'll be talking to somebody and we'll have our masks on and it's like, and I'm like, nah, yeah, like you lose something when you can't see their mouth moving in terms of communication. It's the same thing with meetings. There's a visual cue that you get when you're doing that. Second thing, and I'm going to use this as kind of a global principle. Bad meetings are exponentially bad when you do them remotely. What I mean by that is, if you already have bad meetings in person and then you try and do them remote, it's exponentially bad. It's like what I've seen with kids on remote learning, like when schools are like, hey, we're going to do remote classrooms, and a lot of them just put up a webcam on the teacher in the front of the room and expected that all the kids would stay engaged from their homes. It just didn't work. I just saw Network Chuck jump in yelling Viato, yes, and again, more on Viato to come. We'll talk about that later. But when you're talking about meetings, if you're having bad meetings anyway, like you come to an in-person meeting and it's just like things aren't jiving, when you do those remotely, it's rough. So know that the reason I'm having this is because fixing remote meetings won't fix a bad meeting to begin with, right? So some of the principles I'm gonna mention are just stuff that you should do for any meeting, especially in remote meetings. 3 to 5 minutes max per person. Gauge that and even state that in your mind as like, hey, that's about how much communication before the person on the other end begins to fade away. And let me ask you, here's my 3 to 5 minutes. Do you agree with that? What I mean is, you're in a meeting, you're talking, you got about 3, at most 5 minutes before people are fading away, checking email. Even if their video is on, they may just be glossing over, especially in remote meetings. So when you're thinking about your comments, less is more. Say things in a way that doesn't end up with you grandstanding for 5, 7, 10 minutes, because you've probably lost most of the people on there, especially the ones with just their initials showing, if you know what I mean. So third thing for remote meetings that I've found to be successful and effective is give people an agenda in advance and let them know who you will be calling on. If you're the one preparing the meeting, do people a favor and be like, hey, FYI, we're going to be talking about this. I'm going to be calling on this person, so that they can prepare for that. If you're in a meeting, right, if you're just an attendee, respond to that and just be like, hey, is there anything that you wanted me to prepare? The reason I say that is when you're doing remote meetings, one of the challenges that I see is people are stretching for engagement, so they just start calling people on the spot. So let's just say you're doing a meeting on a new router upgrade that you're going to do this weekend with the team, right? And you're like, okay, this is what's happening, blah, blah, blah. And then you start realizing, like, nobody's saying anything. Michael, what do you think about that? Like, you start reaching for things. You're like, Bob, did you have any thoughts? And if people aren't prepared, especially in a remote meeting, they're going to be like, first off, you'll have the awkward silence because they're like, oh, I forgot my mute button on, right? Then you're going to have the, microphone clutter and be like, no, nothing that I had. And you just feel the energy from the meeting, the collaborative energy that should happen in any meeting, just drain away immediately when those kind of things happen. So what I find is remote meetings take a whole new level of intentionality, a whole new level of, okay, let me think. It's not just, let's just go in a room and talk this through. It's more so, let me lay out my topics, and I'm going to let the people know in the meeting that I'm going to be calling on them at this point and this point. So they should have something to say when I do that. Last thing that I'll mention, then I'm going to just look at your comments, and I'd love to hear your perspective too. What have you found that works well in remote meetings when you're getting together with a group of people? The last thing that I'll say is large meetings do not work as well at all. Meaning meetings that are 10 people and above, really be super intentional with those meetings. Because once people know they're in a crowd, they go into TV mode where it's just like, nobody sees me. At that point, video doesn't really matter because most video streaming doesn't display every face from the 40, 50, 100 people that are in that meeting at a time, right? So they just kind of go into listen mode. If that, right, they're probably doing other things because it's more of a broadcast, like it's like a YouTube video as I'm talking to you right now. So when you're thinking about remote meetings, if you're going to have a large, like an all hands, a company meeting, be very precise and very concise with the information that you're trying to present in those meetings. Calling on people prepared that, when you call on them for specific pieces, right? So I've found large group meetings do not work anywhere near as well remotely as in person, even though they're more effective, more efficient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the key points that I wanted to bring up. What I'd love for you to do is chat in. What has worked for you? And I just want to take some time and hear, or what hasn't worked for you. Maybe that's easier because a lot of people are like, oh, these remote meetings are terrible. So let me scroll back at some of the comments. Jake, yes, agenda. I've had customers ask to set up a call to discuss port configuration. It's so vague and makes us less prepared. Yes, and I would say even a topic list of what you're going to say. Let me tell you the challenge that you have with a lot of meetings, remote meetings especially, is you'll have a thought. You're like, oh, we need to meet on that. You just throw a meeting request out there to save the date. You're like, I'm saving the time with you. Your intention is probably like, yeah, we'll put some topics in there or we'll figure it out when we get there. That doesn't happen as well when it comes to remote meeting. Filthy Animal, decent headset mic setup is important. Nothing more annoying than hearing somebody's feedback through somebody else's mic. Or if you're driving, leaving your mic unmuted. I've run into this all the time where you're just like, who's doing that? Like it's just this road noise. So yes, huge thing. Save the host. Anas, agree. Most of the time, it's my manager talking, so we can't help but be distracted. And that's, Anas, you're bringing up a great point. Your manager may not know the stuff that we're talking about right now. I have found a lot of managers, a lot of executives feel like if they have something to say, everybody immediately considers it important. Thus, they're going to be tuned in and engaged. And they're surprised when they're like, okay, so what do you guys think? And nobody responds. That typically is a poorly structured meeting because the attendees of that meeting were prepared or geared because you didn't follow some of what I mentioned. It's not 3 to 5 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. They were geared for just like, I'm just listening. This is just information, right? Terrible meetings most of the time are just information. Remote meetings have to be that engaging type to where you're pulling people into it. So what I would say is let your manager know. You might just say, hey, and tactfully, your meetings are terrible, but it's more of like, hey, just so you know, a lot of times it's hard for me, personalize it, hard for me to stay engaged when we're in these remote meetings and it's just a lot of conversation. I wonder if there's, I'm curious, is there ways that we could figure out that, that I could present a piece of this, and some of it may add more work to you, but in the end, it's going to be beneficial for everybody. Let's see, my companies want people to use cameras, but most don't. I would love to hear on that. I'll throw myself right in the same boat. I want everybody to use a camera all the time, but I recognize sometimes it's not conducive to location. And I've been there, you wake up late, you're in bed, you're called into a meeting, you're not going to turn your camera on, right? So there's some, or you're out for a walk or whatever the case is. B, and the other half of me is like, okay, if that was an in-person meeting, obviously you'd be there, you'd be dressed, like why with remote meetings? So that's one thing. So two, some people just abhor turning on their camera. I don't know if it's I don't know. And maybe you could tell me what, and maybe you're one of those people. And honestly, I'm not saying it critically. I want to know, like, what is it about turning on your camera? Because I've tried to have conversations with people, and you can tell it's uncomfortable because they go into joking mode. Well, I have a face made for radio, or well, my camera's never working. It's a driver issue. It goes into comedy where people are trying to joke it off, like, oh, it's there's something funny that's keeping me from turning on my camera. But underneath that, there's something seriously there, and I'm curious. Maybe this could be a whole live stream in itself. Why do people fight turning on their webcam during a meeting? I'm curious. I would love to know from your perspective. And let me just, Anas is saying, some are even uncomfortable turning their cameras on. Yeah. Some people are very introverted, and you're allowing people virtually into your house. Good point, Greg. Your dirty laundry sitting behind you. Although I will say some of that is mitigated with all the backgrounds that you can put in, the green screen effect, if you could do. Corey, you're in a place where you usually go to be safe and not observed. You're bringing up some good points there. Bad hair day. We all have bad hair days, but you're bringing up some good points. You're inviting people into your home, and that's something I didn't even think about. Until you guys just said it just now. Like for instance, there's a reason I never stream from my house. And a lot of that is my wife, my family. They're not comfortable being on camera, and I would assume that for a lot of people, they're like, you know what, I don't want behind me my husband, my wife, my kids. It may be introducing a whole new level. But I will also say there's people that are in office that won't turn on their camera. So that's another thing. So Filthy Animal says, I'd never had a Skype call before lockdown in March. I was a bit nervous at first, but now it's just the norm. Yeah, and that's where I'm in the same boat. But you might be onto something there. I think that was Corey. Some people just don't want their there's that line between personal and work, and they don't want it crossed. So that could be some of it. Let's see. Oh man, just saw the time. I got to turn around. I have a meeting, a remote meeting in just a few minutes. So let's see. If there's a small group meeting in person behind a single device, make sure they speak clearly so remote users don't feel left out. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll just 100% agree with that. I do. So Dino Rider, I do always put my camera on, even if the others don't. And I would say, okay. Last thing on this camera thing. I thought peer pressure would work with what you're saying there. Like I would think leading by example, or hey, if everybody's got their cameras on, then the people that don't will be like, we should turn our cameras on too. But that doesn't work. I have found that when people take that no camera. It's like and that's where I have some stuff to think about there. Is this a you're in my personal space thing? I feel exposed, or April. I want to take April. I'm just yet to come out of my shell and step out of my comfort zone. Then COVID happens. Yeah, and that could be with what April is saying there. It's like, and I also have to make sure I don't take for advantage. I mean, I'm a live streamer. Like I've got no problem, obviously, walking around, a park with people walking by, dogs jumping and everything else with my camera on. It doesn't faze me so I have to not take for granted that there's perspectives that I don't have that other people have. I'm just going to leave it there as a point of reflection from this meeting. Having cameras on in meetings. Are you invading somebody's personal space by saying, why don't you turn your camera on? Even though if you were to have an in-person meeting, obviously you would expect that person to show up fully clothed and hair done. So point of reflection. Let's let that tail off into the abyss of remote meeting ponderances. So that said, let me wrap it up there. I still see some comments coming in. So yeah, continue chatting. I'm curious. I'm going to review the comments when it's said and done. But yeah, some great thoughts. So I will see you next Thursday. Probably talk a little bit more about Viato. I'm seeing a lot of comments on that. So talk to you then.